They say a mother's love can move mountains, but mine almost got me killed in my own bed. I still remember the chill that ran down my spine that night, not from the October storm raging outside, but from the eyes of the boy I had once called son. Those eyes weren't full of love or even anger. They were hollow, and behind them lived something I no longer recognized. My name is Thelma Willis, and I've lived in Beaufort, South Carolina all my life. Folks here know me as the lady who bakes pies for the church fair and sits on the porch in a creaky rocking chair with a good book and a pitcher of sweet tea. But what they don't know, what I've hidden for over 30 years, is the story of the boy I adopted and the nightmare that nearly destroyed our family. I'm 76 now. My hands are stiff from arthritis. My eyes blur sometimes when I read too long, but my memory, especially of that year, is sharp as ever. I can still smell the marsh after a summer rain, still hear the calls of the seabirds over the salt flats, and I can still see his face, Roger's, the boy I brought home with every hope in the world and who nearly took everything from me. I live in the same weather-beaten house on Battery Creek Road, right where the land gives way to the tide. From my front porch, I can see the low-hanging moss that drapes the oaks like curtains, and beyond them, the slow shimmer of the river. Some mornings, I sit there and wonder how things might have turned out differently if I had seen the signs earlier, if I had listened to my instincts, if love had truly been enough. Back in 1992, life was full. My husband, Harold, was still alive, then strong and quiet, a man of few words but deep feeling. He worked down at the grain mill, supervising shipments off the docks. We had 2 children, Paul, already 17 and preparing to join the Navy, and Marilyn, 15, full of life and ambition, dreaming of becoming a nurse in Charleston. But as the house began to empty, so did a piece of my heart. It was Marilyn who first planted the seed. She'd been working on a community project at St. Joseph's Home for Children over in Port Royal. She came home with red-rimmed eyes and said something I'll never forget, Mama. Those kids, they don't even cry anymore, like nobody's ever going to come for them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Harold sat beside me in the dark, smoking one of his hand-rolled cigarettes, listening as I whispered my thoughts. I think we have room, I told him. He looked at me through the glow of the porch light and said, if it's what you want, Thelma, we'll do it. A month later, we met Roger. He was 9 years old, but something about him felt older. He had dark, watchful eyes, and he didn't smile, not even when we brought him a new backpack with his name stitched on it. He didn't speak much either. The caseworkers said his mother had died of an overdose, and no one knew who the father was. No relatives, no visitors. He had been in the system since he was 5. I remember seeing him in the corner of the orphanage's courtyard, hunched over a book, barely noticing the other children. When the caseworker introduced us, he didn't even lift his head, but something in me stirred. Maybe it was that quiet ache behind his eyes, or maybe it was the way he gripped the book, like it was the only thing in the world he trusted. I reached out my hand and said softly, "Hi, Roger. I'm Thelma. Would you like to come home with us?" He didn't answer, but he didn't say no either. Looking back now, I wonder if the silence was his way of protecting us, or maybe it was a warning we just couldn't hear. Bringing Roger into our home changed everything. At first, it was like learning to dance with a shadow. He spoke little, ate in silence, flinched when anyone came too close. Our son Paul tried, but he was already halfway out the door to the Navy. Marilyn was gentler, reading to Roger and sneaking him her desserts. Harold, well, he kept his distance, observing more than engaging. Me, I did what mothers do. I cooked, cleaned, folded his tiny shirts, and whispered promises in the dark that he wasn't alone anymore. I believed down to my bones that love would heal him. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong. What I didn't understand then, and what I've come to realize all too late, is that some wounds don't close with affection, and some darkness can't be lit by kindness alone. This is not just a story about a boy who went bad. It's a story about the danger of denial, the cost of unquestioning love, and the terrifying truth that sometimes, even in your own home, you don't truly know who's sleeping under your roof. It was the spring of 1992 when we first stepped into the dim hallway of St. Joseph's Home for Children. I still remember the way the floor creaked beneath my shoes and how the air smelled faintly of bleach and damp paper. The walls were covered in finger paintings that looked cheerful from afar, but up close, you could see the smudges, the rushed brush strokes, the absence of names in the corners. They were anonymous little bursts of color from forgotten hands. We were led by Mrs. Pendleton, the director, a stiff woman with a voice like gravel and a permanent frown etched between her brows. She looked Harold up and down like he was a mechanic, and I was a fragile vase. Most folks come here wanting babies, she said as she unlocked her office door. Toddlers, maybe. No one ever asks for the older ones. We're not most folks, I replied, surprising even myself with the steel in my voice. We want someone who really needs a home. She studied me for a long time. Then she nodded once and pulled a folder from the cabinet behind her. I have a boy, she said, sliding the folder across the desk. 9 years old. Name's Roger. Came here when he was 5. Mama overdosed in a motel off I-95. No father listed, no kin willing to claim him. Quiet, smart, but... She hesitated, hard to reach. I opened the folder. The photograph clipped to the top was grainy. A small, thin boy with jet black hair and oversized eyes stared back at the camera like he wanted nothing to do with it. I couldn't explain it, but something in me clicked. I looked up at Harold, and without a word, he gave the smallest nod. We asked to meet Roger that day. He was in the courtyard, sitting on the far bench with a tattered copy of The Secret Garden in his lap. He didn't even look up when we approached. Roger, Mrs. Pendleton said gently, though it didn't quite match her usual tone. This is Mr. and Mrs. Willis. They'd like to say hello. He glanced up briefly, just enough to assess us. Then he returned to his book without a word. He's shy, she said, clearly embarrassed, but I didn't see shyness. I saw fear. I knelt beside the bench and offered him a soft smile. Hi there. Roger. I like that book too. The part where the garden starts blooming again, that's my favorite. He didn't speak, but the corners of his mouth twitched. Just a little. Enough. Harold sat beside me on the low stone edge and stayed quiet, as he often did. He was never one for filling silence, and I think that helped. Roger wasn't overwhelmed by questions or loud affection, just presence, just calm. When we left that day, I already knew. Roger was meant to come home with us. The adoption process took nearly 4 months. There were interviews, inspections, home studies, background checks. Marilyn cleaned her room more in those weeks than she had in the last year. Paul helped Harold clear out the back room for Roger, even if he grumbled about sharing space. We'll finish the attic for you, I told Paul, hoping he'd hang in there until then. Fine, he said, tossing a football into the back of his truck. But I'm not babysitting. When the approval finally came through, we picked Roger up on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. He came out with a single canvas backpack, no suitcase, no toys, no keepsakes, just a few clothes, a beat-up book, and a plastic toy car with one missing wheel. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. He didn't look back. The first few weeks were quiet. So quiet I often forgot he was in the house. He'd sit by the window for hours, staring out at the marsh like he was waiting for something. At meals, he barely touched his food unless I placed it directly in front of him. When Harold spoke, Roger would lower his eyes and shrink into himself. He shared a room with Paul at first, and the tension between them was thick as smoke. One night, I heard Paul mutter under his breath, "Why does he always stare like that?" "He's not used to us yet," I whispered back. "Give him time." We tried to make Roger feel at home. I cooked his favorite spaghetti with meat sauce every Friday. Marilyn gave him a book of riddles and read them aloud while he listened from the hallway. Harold taught him how to bait a fishing line, though Roger never cast it. But the moment that truly changed things came exactly 1 month after he moved in. I baked a small chocolate cake, nothing fancy. Just a little celebration for his first month in our home. I stuck a single candle in the center and gathered everyone at the table. "Happy 1-month anniversary, Roger," I said, placing the cake in front of him. "We're glad you're here." He stared at the candle for a long time, and then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. Just a tiny curl of the lips. Barely there, but I saw it. Harold did too. He squeezed my hand beneath the table and gave a soft nod. That night, I believed everything was going to be okay. I thought love was winning, but, as I would learn soon enough, love can't always save someone who doesn't want to be saved. For a while after that night with the cake, things really did seem to get better. Roger started coming to the dinner table without being called. He even asked Harold a question once about the tools in his shed, and you'd have thought Harold had just been handed a winning lottery ticket by the look on his face. Marilyn beamed every time Roger answered her, even if it was just a word or two. The house began to feel warmer. When school started again in the fall, we enrolled Roger at the public elementary in downtown Beaufort. I packed his lunch every morning, always a peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, and a cookie, and stood at the front door watching until he disappeared around the bend with the other children. He came home those first few days quiet, but not unhappy. I asked about his teachers, and he said Miss Palmer was fine. When I asked if he'd made any friends, he shrugged. "Kids don't like me much." I wanted to pull him into a hug, but I knew better. Roger still flinched sometimes when anyone touched him too quickly. So I smiled instead and said, "Give it time, sweetheart. You're a good boy. They'll see that." But the signs came slowly, like drops of water wearing down stone. At first, it was small things. A kitchen knife that was usually in the drawer ended up behind the couch. A candle from the mantel found in Roger's closet. My sewing scissors, missing for a week, finally turned up in the laundry hamper wrapped in a t-shirt. Each time, he had the same answer: "I didn't put it there," or maybe someone else did it. Harold didn't believe in dancing around things. "You need to stop lying, Roger," he said one evening after the silver rosary that once belonged to my mother vanished for 5 days. "We don't punish people for making mistakes in this house, but we don't tolerate dishonesty." Roger's eyes went flat. That was the only way to describe it. Flat, emotionless, like a pane of dark glass. "I didn't lie," he said, low and slow. "Maybe someone else is trying to make me look bad." That night, Harold told me, "There's something not right with that boy's eyes. Thelma, It's like they're watching you, but not seeing you. I tried to brush it off. He's just scared. Harold, you saw the records. He's been through hell. Give him time. But the unease had already crept into my chest. Then came the outbursts. At school, Miss Palmer started calling. He has moments, she said. He'll sit through half the day just fine. Then suddenly, over the smallest thing, a missing eraser, a torn page in a workbook, he'll explode, screaming, crying. Once, he kicked over a chair and locked himself in the supply closet. I took Roger aside one afternoon and tried to reach him. Sweetheart, are you upset about something? Did someone hurt you at school? No, he said, looking past me. They just don't like me. People never do. They just don't know you yet. That's all. He stared at me for a long moment and whispered, You don't know me either. That chilled me more than I care to admit. At home, he grew more reclusive. He spent hours in his room. The door always closed, sometimes locked. When I knocked, he'd yell that he was reading or sleeping. Harold started limiting his time alone, asking Roger to help with chores, join us for family walks, anything to keep him from isolating. It worked for a time. But when he turned 11, a new phase began. One day, he came home later than usual, his chin scraped, shirt torn. I ran to him in a panic, but before I could ask, he threw his backpack to the floor and screamed. They said you only adopted me for money, that no one wants kids like me unless they're paid. The pain in his voice felt like it came from years of being unloved. Before I could think, I wrapped him in my arms. At first, he was stiff. Then, he melted and cried like I'd never seen before. A cry from the gut, the kind you don't just hear, you feel. You're my son, I whispered. You always will be. Not for money, not for charity, for love, for family. And again, for a while, it seemed like we turned a corner. He started to talk more at dinner. He asked Harold questions about the old fishing boat out back. He even laughed, really laughed, when Marilyn told him a joke about a substitute teacher who mistook glue for lotion. But something deeper still lingered. Like a storm off the coast, you could sense it long before it made landfall. I caught him one evening, standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, just watching, not moving, not blinking, just standing there in the dark. When I called his name, he didn't answer, just turned and walked away. I wanted to tell Harold, but what would I say? That our son was staring, that I was scared of a boy I loved instead. I turned to my Bible and whispered prayers I didn't know how to finish. The spiral continued. He started lying about going to school, wandering around town, and I began finding cigarette butts in his jeans. I took him to the community center therapist, but Roger sat there for 3 full sessions and didn't say a word. He has deep-rooted abandonment trauma, the counselor told me. He's testing whether you'll leave like everyone else did. I nodded, heart aching. I won't leave him. I believe you, she said. But I also believe he's afraid of what happens if you stay. It was the first time I'd ever considered that our love, our presence, might frighten him more than comfort him. I wanted so badly to be his home, his healing, his second chance. But Roger didn't want healing. Roger wanted something else entirely. And soon, I'd learn just how dark that desire could become. By the time Roger turned 12, it was as if something inside him had snapped, or maybe just shifted permanently into place. He wasn't a little boy anymore, and it showed in every sharp angle of his face, every word he chose not to say, His body was changing faster than I could keep up with, taller, broader, the voice dropping from high and cautious to something low, unpredictable. But it wasn't just the physical growth that unsettled me. It was the way he started looking at the world and at me. He had always been quiet, but now he was secretive. There's a difference. He started locking his bedroom door even when he wasn't inside. The few friends he had, Tony and Mark, stopped coming around. I asked him about it one day, and he shrugged. People are fake. That was all he said. I tried to draw him out, offering to take him for ice cream or to the pier like we used to. He refused every time. I'm not a baby, he'd mutter, eyes darting away like I'd insulted him. Harold grew restless. He was never much for talking feelings. He was a man of hands and hammers and engines, but I could tell Roger's distance was bothering him. He needs to get out of that damn room. Harold said one night after Roger slammed his door for the third time that day, "Get him on the boat. I'll take him fishing this weekend." But Roger declined, said he didn't like the smell of fish, that he got seasick. What he did like, apparently, was his reflection. I'd catch him in the hallway mirror, not adjusting his shirt or combing his hair, but staring, studying himself. Sometimes with a frown, sometimes with a strange tilt of the head, like he was trying to figure out who the person was looking back at him. He also started asking for things. Can I get those Nike sneakers with the air bubble? Can I have a new cologne? Can I get that hair gel that smells like mint? At first, I thought maybe he was just trying to fit in. But then I found his first stash. I was changing his sheets one Thursday morning. He'd left for school, or so I thought, and when I lifted the mattress to straighten the corners, something slid out a handful of magazines, not the kind teenage boys are usually curious about. These were harder, darker, the kind I never imagined holding in my hands, much less finding under my roof. My knees buckled a little. I slid them back, not knowing what to say to Harold, not even sure I could bring myself to tell him. But worse than the magazines came 2 days later. I was doing laundry, same routine as always. His jeans were inside out, pockets turned halfway, and when I reached inside to check for loose change, I pulled out a lighter and a crumpled pack of Marlboros. My stomach dropped. I sat down right there on the cold tile floor and cried. What was happening to this boy I had cradled in my arms not even 3 years before? When Harold came home that evening, I showed him everything, the lighter, the magazines. He stared at them for a long time, then set them on the table like they were evidence in a trial. He's going off the rails. "Thelma," he said, voice low, "and we're letting it happen. We need to talk to him," I said, "not just yell. Maybe this is a phase. Boys his age." "No," Harold said, shaking his head. "This isn't just puberty. This is something deeper, darker." That night, I crept into Roger's room while he was in the shower and looked through his drawers. That's when I found it an old framed photo of me, one I'd taken years ago, back when I was still in my 30s. It had gone missing from the living room shelf months earlier. I thought maybe I'd misplaced it, or it had gotten broken during cleaning. But there it was, beneath his bed, with the glass cracked and fingerprints smudged all over the frame. A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. When he came out of the bathroom that night, towel around his neck, I tried to sound calm. "Roger, did you take that photo of me from the living room?" He froze. "What photo?" "The one of me at the beach, from when I was younger." He looked at me for a long time, eyes steady and unblinking. "I liked how you looked in it," he said. That was all. No apology, No shame, just a statement, like he was commenting on the weather. From that moment on, I began to feel it, that heaviness, that thing mothers never want to name. The creeping realization that something isn't just off, it's dangerous. And the looks started changing. Not the childish glances of admiration or the way a son might look at his mother with pride or comfort. These looks lingered, and they made my skin crawl. One afternoon, while folding towels, I felt someone watching me. I turned, and there he was, leaning in the hallway doorway, silent, watching. His gaze wasn't confused or curious. It was hungry. I forced a smile. Need something. Roger. He blinked, as if caught in a trance. No, just passing by. He wasn't, from that day forward. I began locking my bedroom door at night, and I hated myself for it. Hated what it meant. Hated that I no longer trusted my own son under the same roof. Hated that I, Thelma Willis, mother, caretaker, nurturer, was starting to feel afraid. But the worst moment came when I walked in on him. It was late afternoon, and I had just come home from the corner market. The house was quiet, too quiet. I knocked gently on his door, didn't hear a response, and pushed it open just a crack. Roger was sitting on the edge of his bed, shirtless, holding that same photo of me. He didn't see me at first. He was staring at it, running his finger across the glass. His lips were moving, whispering something I couldn't make out. When the door creaked, he jerked his head toward me and stood up so quickly the frame hit the floor and shattered. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to sound firm, not frightened. His face flushed red. Nothing. Just looking at the photo. He stepped forward. I stepped back. Something broke in me that day. Not just trust, but hope. Hope that he'd turn the corner. That love would be enough. That I hadn't made a terrible, irreversible mistake. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay next to Harold, listening to the sounds of the house, the wind rattling the windows, the occasional creak of wood, and somewhere down the hall, Roger breathing in the dark. It was a Thursday, late October of 1994, the kind of sticky southern night that warns of a coming storm. The air in Beaufort was thick, too warm for fall, and the Spanish moss in the oaks barely moved. Something about the stillness felt wrong, but I chalked it up to nerves, to the weariness that had been building inside me, like a tide waiting to break. That evening, I made Roger's favorite chicken stew with rice and butter beans. He ate quietly. Harold was tired from work, barely speaking as he chewed. And I was just grateful we were all at the table, acting like a family. For a brief moment, it almost felt normal again. "I've got to be out the door early tomorrow," Harold said, sipping sweet tea. "Big shipment at the mill. I'll be gone before sunrise." Roger didn't respond. He kept eating, but I noticed the way he looked up just for a second when Harold said that. There was something calculated in that glance, like he was filing the information away. But I brushed it off. I had become good at brushing things off by then. After dinner, Roger excused himself, said he needed to study. I heard his bedroom door close. Not slam, just that quiet, controlled click that made my chest tighten. Harold stayed up watching the news while I cleaned the kitchen. Then I showered and got into bed, praying my nightly rosary like I always did. It began to rain just before I drifted off one of those heavy, slow southern storms, the kind where thunder stays far off, but the roof drums steadily with water. I remember thinking how grateful I was to be dry and safe in our home, with a husband beside me and a son just down the hall. I wish I had never let myself feel that peace. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. 3, maybe 4 in the morning. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, thick like molasses. I stirred, disoriented, then froze. Something was wrong. You know that feeling, that chill at the base of your neck when you know you're not alone. The room was quiet except for Harold's soft snoring beside me, but there was a presence in the darkness. I opened my eyes and turned my head. Roger was standing by the bed. He wasn't moving, just watching me. No shirt, just shorts, his bare chest rising and falling, slowly. And there was something else, something unspeakable. He was aroused. My throat closed up. At first, my mind scrambled for explanations. Was he sleepwalking? Was he sick? But nothing made sense. Nothing could explain why my son, my boy, was standing over me in that way. "Roger," I whispered, voice shaking. "Are you all right?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer. I started to sit up, but before I could move, he pressed a hand hard over my mouth. "Don't wake him," he whispered, glancing toward Harold. "I don't want to hurt him." Panic exploded inside me. I tried to scream, to kick, but he climbed onto the bed with terrifying strength, straddling me, his weight pinning me down. His face hovered inches from mine. "I always wanted to do this," he whispered. "From the first day I came here. You didn't see the way I looked at you, did you?" Tears streamed down my face. I shook my head wildly, trying to scream into his palm, but he was strong, so much stronger than I realized. And then, blessedly, Harold stirred. He groaned, rolled over, and then sat up, blinking into the darkness. "What the hell?" Roger turned, startled. He didn't move off me. "Get off her," Harold roared, launching himself from the bed. They collided hard, falling to the floor. I scrambled back, gasping for air, reaching for the lamp. When the light finally flicked on, the scene before me was something out of a nightmare. My husband and my son fighting on the floor like wild animals. Roger thrashed, fists flying. Harold tried to pin his arms, shouting for me to call the police. "Go. Thelma, call them now." But I couldn't move. I stood frozen at the edge of the bed, watching helplessly as Roger grabbed the broken lamp from the floor and, before I could scream, smashed it across Harold's forehead. Blood spattered the wall. Harold crumpled, dazed but conscious. Roger stood, panting, staring down at him. "See what you made me do," he growled, looking at me now, eyes wide and wild. "If you had just stayed quiet." That voice wasn't Roger's. It was deep and foreign and cold. It was the voice of something broken, something lost. I found my legs and bolted. I ran from the room, down the hallway, through the living room, yanking the front door open with shaking hands. Rain-soaked wind hit me in the face, but I didn't care. I screamed, "Somebody help me!" Porch lights flickered on. Doors opened. I heard Miss Louise across the street call out my name. Mr. Arnold, our neighbor, ran barefoot into the road. Roger burst from the house seconds later, but when he saw the gathering crowd, he turned and vaulted over the back fence like a deer in flight. He disappeared into the dark. Harold stumbled into the living room, blood streaming from the gash on his forehead. I ran to him, shaking, sobbing, holding him like he was the only solid thing left in my world. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Small town response time. Sheriff Ray Oswald, who'd known our family since we moved to Beaufort, stood in our living room and listened as I tried to explain the unexplainable. "Are you sure, Mrs. Willis?" he asked softly. "Roger did this. How do you tell someone that your son, the boy you raised, who you fed and bathed and kissed goodnight, just tried to assault you in your sleep. I nodded. Yes, I'm sure. They searched the neighborhood that night, but found nothing. Roger had vanished into the storm. The house was eerily quiet the morning after. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that sits heavy in the air, like fog after a fire. There were broken shards of ceramic from the lamp, blood droplets trailing from the bedroom to the bathroom, where Harold had tried to clean himself up before the ambulance arrived. I remember the towel he pressed to his head, white, embroidered with blue flowers stained dark and red. He didn't need stitches, just a butterfly bandage and a tetanus shot. But something else had broken, not just in his body, in his spirit. Neither of us could sleep that night, even after the police left and the neighbors drifted back inside. We sat in the kitchen, staring into cups of coffee we never drank. I couldn't stop shaking. Harold lit one cigarette after another, his face locked in a silence that scared me more than his wound. I should have seen it, he muttered finally, his voice hoarse. I should have seen this coming. No, I whispered. We both missed it, but deep down, I hadn't, not really. I had seen the signs. I had felt them in my gut, in the hairs that rose on the back of my neck when Roger passed too close, in the way I locked my bedroom door and hated myself for it. I had known. I just hadn't wanted to believe. The next 3 days were a blur. We filed a report. They opened a case, but this was Beaufort, not New York City. No Amber Alerts, no TV helicopters, no search dogs. Sheriff Oswald called in favors with deputies in Port Royal and Burton. Patrol cars swept the highways and back roads. Flyers were printed. The local paper ran a small column, but Roger was gone. On the 4th day, just before sunset, the phone rang. I picked it up with trembling hands. Mrs. Willis Sheriff Oswald's voice was grave. We found Roger. My knees buckled, and I clutched the edge of the counter. Is he? He's alive, the sheriff said quickly, but not well. He was found in an abandoned house near the train tracks. Looks like he overdosed. We're taking him to Beaufort Memorial now. Harold drove us there in silence. I remember the smell of his aftershave, how tightly he gripped the steering wheel, how the sky looked like it had been painted over in charcoal. We arrived just as they were wheeling Roger in. He looked nothing like the boy we'd raised. His skin was pale and waxy. His eyes were half closed, pupils dilated, lips cracked. There was vomit on his shirt. His hands trembled. He looked used up, like something discarded and dying. I reached for his hand. It was ice cold, but he didn't respond. The doctor, a kind man named Dr. Ayers, explained what we already feared. He's showing signs of methamphetamine use, he said gently. His vitals are weak. We'll stabilize him here, but he'll need to be transferred to a psychiatric facility with detox support. I nodded, numb. It felt like a decision had already been made for us. Like this story we'd tried to write with hope and love had taken the pen from our hands long ago. That night, I sat beside Roger's hospital bed. Harold stood near the window, arms crossed, silent. I watched the heart monitor beep in steady rhythm, watched his chest rise and fall, and remembered that first night we brought him home. The way he stood in the hallway holding that toy car, the way he had smiled just once at a slice of chocolate cake. Where had that boy gone? Then, around 2 a.m, Roger stirred. His eyes opened slowly, groggy and unfocused. He turned his head and looked straight at me. Mom, he whispered, voice barely audible. I'm here, I said, choking back tears. I'm right here, baby. His eyes watered, and for a moment, just a flicker, I saw it again. That boy, that small, scared boy who used to trace the edge of the couch cushion with his finger when he was nervous. "I'm sorry," he said. I didn't want to. "I know," I said, brushing his hair back. "We're going to get you help. We're going to fix this." But we didn't fix it. We couldn't. The next day, Roger was transferred to the psychiatric hospital in Grand Rapids. The doctors said he was a danger to himself and others, that he needed long-term care. We signed the papers with hands that barely held steady. Before we left, we were allowed one final visit. He was handcuffed to the hospital bed. His eyes were glazed over again, the light gone. I kissed his forehead. He didn't flinch, but he didn't speak either. 3 days later, we got a call from Dr. Ayers. "Mrs. Willis," he said, "your son has been diagnosed with schizophrenia and likely antisocial personality disorder as well. The trauma he endured as a child, the abandonment, possible abuse likely triggered and worsened his condition. The drugs pushed it into full manifestation." He paused. "Based on his mental health assessment and the danger he poses, the judge is assigning him to indefinite psychiatric custody. He'll be held in a secured facility until if he is ever considered stable." I thanked him. I hung up. Then I sat in the same chair by the same window I'd watched the tide come in from for decades and wept until my body couldn't hold itself upright anymore. Harold didn't say much. He just sat beside me and wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "He's gone," I said. "Not gone." Harold replied softly, "Just not coming back." The letter came in the spring of 1995, about 6 months after Roger was admitted to the psychiatric facility in Grand Rapids. It was plain, no return address beyond the institution's name and a reference number. I unfolded the single sheet of paper slowly, my hands trembling. It was from the attending psychiatrist, requesting our presence for a formal family counseling session. The letter said Roger had stabilized somewhat. He was under heavy medication and was participating occasionally in group therapy. They believed a monitored visit could help evaluate his long-term placement. I didn't sleep the night before we went. Harold and I sat up in silence in the living room, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the only sound between us. Neither of us said what we were thinking, that maybe, just maybe, there was something left of Roger we could still reach. The facility wasn't like the hospital in Beaufort. It was sterile and cold, with white walls that looked like they'd been scrubbed too many times. The lobby smelled of bleach and stale coffee. A young nurse led us down a long hallway where other patients wandered slowly in slippered feet and loose hospital gowns, their faces expressionless. "Please wait here," she said, opening a door to a visitation room, just a table and 3 metal chairs beneath fluorescent lights. Roger was brought in a few minutes later. I barely recognized him. He had lost more weight. His skin had a sickly pallor, and his hair had been shaved short, likely after some incident. His wrists bore faded marks, old restraints. He didn't look at us when he entered. He stared past us, eyes fixed on the corner of the room. I stood up instinctively. "Roger." He blinked slowly and turned his head. When our eyes met, there was a flicker, just a flash of something human. But then it was gone. "What do you want?" he asked, monotone. Harold didn't rise from his chair. He stayed seated, arms crossed, jaw tight. "We just came to see how you were doing," I said gently. "We were told you were getting better." Roger gave a short, joyless laugh. "Better in here, Roger. We want to help," I said. "You're still our son, no matter what." He slammed his hands on the table, making me jump. "Stop saying that I was never your son." Harold stood then, not with anger, but with a weariness I can't describe. "Thelma," he said softly, "let's go." But I stayed. "Roger," I whispered, "do you even remember what you did that night?" He tilted his head and smiled. That same eerie smile I'd seen months before, the one that didn't reach his eyes. "Sometimes," he said. "Other times, I think I dreamed it. Sometimes, I think you made it up." I felt my heart splinter. The doctor had warned us this might happen. Memory dissociation. He called it part of his illness. But that didn't make it any easier to hear. Roger leaned back in his chair, eyes suddenly sharp. "You think you were good to me," he said, "but you never saw me. Not really. I was just a project to you, something to fix." "That's not true," I said, barely above a whisper. "I loved you. I still do." He stared at me for a long moment, then looked away. "I don't care." That was the last thing he said to us. The nurse returned and gently led him away. He didn't look back. And just like that, he was gone back behind those locked doors, into the place where even love couldn't reach him. On the drive home, Harold didn't speak. Neither did I. What was there to say? That we tried, that we failed, that some stories don't get redemption arcs, no matter how badly we want them to. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote Roger a letter I never sent. I told him I forgave him. I told him I still prayed for him, that somewhere inside me I would always hold space for the boy who smiled at chocolate cake. But I never mailed it, because I really knew that some distances can't be crossed, even by the most determined love. That visit was the last time we ever saw him. Time didn't move the way it used to after that final visit. Our house, once filled with noise, Paul's music, Marilyn's chatter, the sound of Harold's boots crossing the floor after a long day, had fallen quiet long ago. But now it felt hollow. Even the birds outside seemed to sing more softly, as if mourning something they couldn't name. Harold tried to move on, in his way. He kept himself busy repairing the back fence, repainting the porch steps, oiling the old tools in his shed. But even those small comforts wore thin. He stopped going to the dock, stopped fishing, stopped playing dominoes with Mr. Arnold on Sunday afternoons. The spark that had always been in his eyes, subtle, steady, even on his most tired days, was gone. He rarely spoke of Roger, and when he did, it was always in the past tense. One evening, as we sat in our usual spots in the living room, me knitting something I'd probably never finish, him nursing a glass of bourbon he hadn't touched in years, he broke the silence. "I should have protected you," he said. "You did," I replied. "You saved my life that night." He shook his head slowly. "Not just that night. I should have protected you from all of it. I saw things, Thelma. I saw them, and I said nothing. My throat closed up. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that none of us could have known what Roger would become. But the truth sat heavy in the space between us. We had seen things, felt things, ignored things, because we loved that boy, and because love, sometimes, makes you blind. The following year, in 1996, Harold began having trouble sleeping. He'd toss and turn, groaning softly, sometimes waking up drenched in sweat, gasping for air. He said it was just nightmares, nothing serious, but I knew it was more. He stopped eating much, lost weight. His face grew pale, gaunt. One night in early May, he collapsed on the back porch. I was in the kitchen and heard the crash. I ran to find him on the steps, clutching his chest, lips trembling. "Call, help," he managed. I did. The ambulance came in 6 minutes, but it wasn't fast enough. Harold Willis died of a massive heart attack on the way to the hospital. I remember sitting in the waiting room, hands clenched in my lap, praying harder than I ever had in my life. Praying for God to give me back just one more day with the man who had held me through the worst pain I'd ever known. But instead, they brought me his wallet and wedding ring in a small plastic bag. I brought him home in a cedar box. The funeral was small, just a handful of neighbors, a few co-workers from the mill, Paul and Marilyn with their children. I don't remember much of it, only the way the wind moved through the trees in the cemetery, the way the Spanish moss dipped low, like it was bowing its head. After that, I drifted. Days blurred together. I'd pour a cup of coffee and leave it untouched. I'd fold Harold's shirts and tuck them back into drawers that would never open again. I'd walk past his old boots by the door and catch myself talking to them, to him, as if he were just out in the yard and would be back any minute. People told me time would help. It didn't. What helped eventually was silence, not the kind that feels empty. The kind that teaches you to sit with your grief, to hold it like an old friend and listen. And in that silence, I realized something. I had spent so many years carrying the burden of Roger's choices, of Harold's guilt, of my own blind hope. I had let those memories grow roots in every corner of my house. But Harold wouldn't have wanted that. He wouldn't have wanted me to become a shadow, a ghost of the woman I'd been when we first stood on that orphanage lawn and saw a broken boy reading in the sun. So one morning, I packed away the picture frames, not to forget, but to let go. I made Harold's favorite sweet potato pie and took it to the church picnic, something I hadn't done in years. I joined the prayer circle again. I said Roger's name aloud for the first time in almost a decade, and I let myself weep, not with shame, but with release. I still visit Harold's grave once a week. I bring 2 folding chairs. I sit in one and place the other beside me, because I like to think he's still listening. I tell him about Paul's promotions, about Marilyn's little girl who just started piano lessons. I tell him I miss his laugh, that I still wear the locket he gave me on our 25th anniversary, and sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees just right, I imagine him saying, "You did your best, Thelma," and maybe, finally. I believe it. Time has a strange way of turning wounds into wisdom, though not without leaving scars behind. For years, I couldn't say Roger's name out loud, couldn't look at family photos without feeling that gaping absence. But with Harold gone, and the house quieter than it had ever been, I had no choice but to face the silence and everything it carried. There was a moment, one quiet Sunday afternoon, when I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. My hair was white, thinner than I remembered. My hands had gone stiff with age. But what struck me most was my eyes. They weren't just tired. They were older in a way that had nothing to do with time. That's when I decided I couldn't let Roger's story, my story, be buried in the silence any longer. I started attending a support group at the local church. It was small at first, just 3 women and an elderly man who had raised a son with bipolar disorder. But it grew, slowly, steadily. We opened our mouths and began to tell the stories no one else would talk about. Stories of children who hurt the people who loved them, of love that wasn't enough, of guilt that clung like wet cotton. There, I met women like Dorothy, whose grandson had set fire to their garage, and Clarence, who hadn't spoken to his daughter in 10 years after she assaulted her mother. None of us had neat endings to offer, no redemption arcs, no perfect recoveries. But we had something else understanding. and the quiet comfort of not being alone. One day, someone asked me, "Do you ever forgive him?" It caught me off guard, not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I realized I already had. I told them, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean trusting again. It means letting go of hate before it hollows you out. I don't forgive the things Roger did, but I forgive the broken boy beneath the rage, the child who never had a chance to grow up whole, the one who came into our home with haunted eyes and who, for a brief time, called me Mom. Through those meetings, I learned to stop asking what I could have done differently, because the truth is, we did everything we could, and sometimes everything still isn't enough. I also learned how to spot the signs I once ignored: the withdrawn behavior, the cruelty masked by silence, the sharp mood swings that no amount of love can soften. I started giving talks at schools and parent meetings, not as an expert, but as someone who'd lived it, survived it. I warned parents to listen to their instincts, to ask the hard questions, and to seek help early, even when it's uncomfortable. I tell them what I wish someone had told me. Love is essential, but love isn't medicine, and no mother, no matter how devoted, can heal what's buried deep in the mind. Sometimes I still dream of Roger, not the boy from the end, but the 9-year-old child with big, quiet eyes and a tattered backpack. In my dreams, he's sitting at our old kitchen table, eating spaghetti, swinging his legs under the chair, and when I hand him a slice of chocolate cake, he smiles just once, just enough. I always wake up crying, but these days, the tears don't come from terror. They come from memory, from loss, from love that tried and failed, but never stopped being love. More than 30 years have passed since the night Roger stood at the foot of my bed and shattered the life I thought we'd built. I've lived many lives since then: widow, grandmother, Sunday school teacher, community volunteer. But I have never stopped being the woman who once opened her door and her heart to a broken child, believing naively, maybe that love could fix anything. I live alone now in the same house in Beaufort, though I've updated a few things. The porch has been repainted. The kitchen cabinets are new. I finally put curtains in Roger's old room, soft white ones that catch the sunlight in the late afternoon. Sometimes I open that door, stand in the doorway, and just breathe in the silence. He's still alive, or at least I think he is. The last letter I received from the hospital came 5 years ago. He was still under psychiatric supervision, still institutionalized, still not safe. They stopped sending updates after that. I haven't visited in over a decade. People might call me heartless for that, but the truth is, I couldn't survive that look in his eyes again, the one that told me everything I needed to know. That the boy I once held, fed, comforted, had been swallowed whole by something none of us could stop. I don't hate him. I don't wish him harm. I pray for him, but I do not chase ghosts anymore. Instead, I've turned to the living. I've found peace in the laughter of my grandchildren, in the soft murmur of hymns during church services, in the touch of friends who sit beside me during support group meetings and cry without shame. The pain never fully goes away, but it does stop defining you. You begin to realize that life is not about making it perfect. It's about surviving the parts that shatter you and still standing afterward. Here's what I want you, dear reader or dear listener, to remember. Love is powerful. It can heal deep wounds. It can pull people back from the edge, but it cannot conquer everything. There are some storms so great, so twisted, they tear through even the most steadfast homes. We mothers, we give everything. We hope, we pray, we sacrifice. But we are not saviors. We are not gods. And that is not failure. That is truth. If you are raising a child with mental illness, addiction, or deep trauma, please get help, not just for them, for you. Talk to someone. Reach out, because silence will eat you alive. If your heart is heavy with guilt, let it go. If you're ashamed to admit you're afraid of your own child, you are not alone. I wasn't a bad mother. Harold wasn't a weak father. We were just human. And we loved a boy who was lost long before he ever came through our door. And to this day, if I could go back in time, I'd still take his hand at that orphanage. I'd still bring him home, because even a broken soul deserves a chance at love. And even when love fails to save it, never fails to mean something. So if you've stayed with me this far, bless you. Thank you for hearing my story, our story. If you've gone through something like this, or know someone who has, please don't carry the weight alone. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if stories like mine mean something to you, if they make you feel a little less alone in this complicated world, please subscribe to channel. We're just a community of old souls with worn hands and full hearts still learning, still healing, still here. Because wisdom doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from surviving the questions. And my dear, I've survived more than most. Thank you for listening. God bless you and your family. And may peace find you no matter where your story begins or how it ends.